Hi, Lynn, welcome.
Hello, Dr. Ari. I've been trying now for a few minutes or for half an hour to log in on Zoom from my laptop, and it's not working. So I've joined now from my iPad, which means I can't run the PowerPoint. Is there someone there who can run the PowerPoint?
Okay. Yeah, I think
because yeah.
Isabella, you can run the PowerPoint.
No, she's busy with something. She's so okay. Isabella won't be there. I was wondering, is there anyone KMA that I can send it to?
Let me get
it's the same one as it's the same one as on Friday.
Oh, let me get the hosts to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Ling.
Yes.
I'm here, but someone from KMA should run it, just in case I have to coordinate my people on this end. But I am here.
You are there, yeah. No, and it's something, I don't know, with Zoom or what, that on my laptop it's hanging. So hopefully it will now. I'm reinstalling it.
All right, no problem. Let me get someone to project that.
Fine. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so.
Brenda, who is the host? Are you able to project? Who is the host?
Hi, Doc, I'm the host.
Peter, do you have the presentation of gunshot wounds?
Little more happy.
Sorry? Email. It's on email, the same one that you used to send the email. I might send you on WhatsApp. I'm on a phone, so I'm unable to project. Okay, let me forward you on WhatsApp. Then when Lynn starts talking, you can project.
Okay.
Okay. Then I think we are only doing that one in terms of projection. So I think we can almost start. I send you on WhatsApp, Senor. Peter, I send you on WhatsApp.
Yeah, Doc. Send me on WhatsApp.
Okay. Forward. Mekutumia. So that's the one we'll project. Gunshot injuries. Now, I think you can open the webinar. It has 100 guys already.
Shall we start, Dr. Kigondo?
Yes, I think we have enough participants. That's good. So, welcome everyone to this webinar. The Kenya Medical Association and the Independent Medical Legal Unit are working together to help in this because of what we have seen in these times, that we are having injuries that may require medical legal assessment in future. And one of the important aspects of attaining justice is to ensure that injuries that may be sustained during these periods are well documented, as we know that in the legal area, documentation and what is called retaining the evidence and good description is important for people to attain justice. One of the things that leads to people not getting justice for the injuries they sustain during situations like we are in is that there is no evidence, or the evidence was poorly collected, or no documentation of the issues. And therefore, we have come together to redo our trainings on documentation. We got a lot of good input on Friday, and we decided to repeat so that more people who could not join in can come in. Today, we have with us Dr. Lynn Kitui, who will take us through documentation of especially gunshot injuries. Then we have Professor Rogena, who will help in the discussion. Then we have the legal team from the Independent Medical Legal Unit. And then we have the National Executive Council members of the Kenya Medical Association to also chip in on the medical aspects. Without further ado, we are 10 minutes into our webinar. I would like Dr. Lynn Kitui to start us off with a formal part, and then we will proceed to the discussion, which will include both medical and legal aspects. Thank you very much, and welcome, Dr. Lynn Kitui.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kikondo, and I appreciate this close collaboration. For those of you online, this is very much a repeat of Friday's webinar. We're sorry that at that time the platform made a number of you have to be unable to join. So I regret.
You can put the camera, Lynn, you can put the camera so that we see your face. Move it a bit to the right, a bit more. There. Perfect.
Sorry,
Perfect.
Thank you. Because I'm on the iPad, I only see you. But yeah, hopefully the connection will work. Thank you. So I appreciate the collaboration with Kenya Medical Association. I apologize for those of you who tried on Friday to get in unsuccessfully. And thank you, KMA, for availing this larger platform. As we start, I want to acknowledge all the brave and strong work that Medics for Kenya, KMA, all sorts of medical groups have been doing the past 2 weeks. It's scary work. We heard some testimonies on Friday of people who felt very intimidated. It is challenging work. And when Dr. Kigondo spoke to me about a week ago, or after Tuesday's attack on protesters, we agreed that this is a crash course. In no way is this full detailed forensic pathology, but we recognize that very many doctors around Kenya may be asked to do things that they have never done before. And we will be trying to share with you the best practices. But as many testified, that is not so easy to do when either you have pressure from various people who will be in the room. Now, on Friday, we were lucky that Johnson Odwor, the chief government pathologist, joined, and he reminded everyone, and let us take it from the biggest expert in Kenya. He says postmortems are not an emergency. The person is already dead. That's easy to say, but it's also important to take it to heart. The family may be pushing you. There may be religious groups opposing postmortem. The police are pushing you. The hospital administration wants all this done, over and done with. But please, this is why we're sharing, because we want to support each other. Sometimes it's good to be two doctors there. That's often what IMLU can help provide, link you up with another doctor. Usually when we don't have so many emergencies, we try to find a pathologist. Right now, that may not always be possible. There are not many of them in Kenya, but just know that stronger together. So with that opening remarks, can we go to the next slide, please? So here I'm going to take the ideal situation, right? And ideally, you would want to see the crime scene. Go with the police and examine this. You want to do an external examination with the clothes on and take pictures of that to see the direction of the bullet, what else may have happened. And then you take the clothes off, again, X-ray, autopsy. And I want to remind people, autopsy is not necessarily opening everything, because it's sometimes so obvious for what has happened. The injuries are so big, and we'll be coming in about documenting the injuries. But to the extent that we can get the trajectory with modern, shall we say, reality where people are or taking film and camera, it may be important to be able to say something about from what direction the bullet entered the body, because that can help you determine which of the many people on the photo from the scene would have been possible to shoot. Ballistics. I'm not going to go into a lot of ballistics. That's a highly technical thing. But Professor Rogena asked me, she's joining, but on phone, to remind everyone, please do not touch the bullet. If you're a surgeon with a live patient, as little forceps handling, wrap it in gauze, put it in a jar or a bottle as evidence. When it is post-mortem, the same thing. Don't have fingerprints all over it, because this is where you're trying to connect the bullet with a gun, and police have to sign for which gun they have been issued. So the markings of the bullet can connect the bullet to a specific gun and then to whoever was the shooter. You might sometimes want to do a complementary exam like a toxicology. That's often when you have like suspicion of suicide, was this person on drugs or alcoholic, and then you'll sit down and write your report. This is hard. This is really hard. And this is why I'm sort of saying, for us who are not pathologists, this is not our normal job. We can get stressed. We need to get support from each other as fellow professionals, but also reach out for counseling. Do not think that you are weak if you find that this is affecting your mental health. And I put the number of Kenya Counseling and Psychological Association, but there are many other counselors. Next slide, please. So what I've called this is rapid documentation in the field situation, and it's not like Hollywood. As I said, clothed body if you can. Usually in Kenya, no, you get the body already undressed on the mortuary. Clean away any blood and debris. And if the bullet hole is covered by body hair, shave it. Photos, 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 photos. These are your evidence in court if we ever get there. There was a question on Friday, how do we hand them over? Yes, you have your own copy, right, on your camera. There was a question that previously it was like, it's only the police photographer which is allowed to present in court. Professor Rogena reminded us that there has been a judge ruling, there is precedence that the doctor's own photos are accepted as evidence. So in a field situation, as I call it, it may be a small hospital, a mortuary, take a photo even with a phone, and then you can forward it to the police to print for their evidence, chain of custody, but keep for yourself. Count the number of bullet wounds. And often you get confused, and I often take like a small post-it note and label them ABC, because you're trying to get the entry wound and the exit wound to match to help you with the trajectory, right? You might use a probe, a metal probe, or any other instrument you have to go through the entry wound and see where it comes out. So then you want to match A and A. And this can be really hard to determine the direction. So the advice from very many senior pathologists, well-versed in being in court, is don't be too bombastic. Say it seems like, it looks like, because there's very many actions that happen in the trajectory of a bullet, where it can have touched something else and ricocheted. Then describe and photograph the wounds, document and conclude. And I've put IMLU's number here if you need some help, if you want us to link you up with a colleague who can be present as a representative of the family. Usually do not have any family there. Let it be the technical people. Doctors, of course, the mortuary technicians will be there. DCI is usually there. These are police cases. Remember, the body, most Kenyans believe the body belongs to the family. No, the body belongs to the state until it's released for burial with a burial permit. So the police are in charge. And now we have IPOA to come. And I think we've seen that they are also overwhelmed. And some described to me, to us on Friday, how the IPOA representative and the DCI representative were sort of quarreling in the mortuary of who is to take the chain of custody of the bullet once it is found, if it is found. So we'll come back to that again, but try to make this a quiet workspace. Sometimes if you have a mob around trying to do this, Dr. Odwor reminded us how useful an X-ray is to see if the bullet shattered bone, because that can help you also something with direction. So please you can use the excuse and say, please, we're taking the body to X-ray, and then get the police to do their work of calming down the crowd, get people out of the room, and so that you have peace of work. Next slide, please. So now we're over to the gory pictures. Reality is often even more gory than the pictures. And it can be sometimes hard to see some of these signs of the darker skin. But what we are trying to look for at the entry wound is an abrasion ring, that it's a sort of red-brown of the skin. That's the heat, right? The bullet is being shot by gunpowder, coming at high speed and is very hot with the flame and the soot and everything. So at the entry, it's hot and there's a kind of burn around. There might be some grease because this is the lubricant carried on the bullet. Very pathognomic is the inverted edge. If you look carefully, the bullet has pushed the tissue inwards like in a tunnel. And here it says smaller than the caliber. You don't even know the caliber by then. And that's a sort of detail. But sometimes the bullet entry wound is very small. Depends a lot on the type of gun and ammunition. There are some which make massive damage and you don't even have a proper, nice, clean wound. You just have tissue damage everywhere, right? Take a photo and describe that the best you can. Next slide. So exit wound, that's where all the energy is now exploding inside the body and there's massive damage as it comes out. It's generally much more irregular. The picture here is showing entry and exit wound side by side to demonstrate how different they look. Because it's coming from inside the body going out, the edges are usually everted, right? It's coming out with protrusion of tissue. It doesn't show any soot deposit or tattoo from the muzzle or stippling. We'll come back to what that is. Sometimes, surprisingly, it can be tiny and slit-like and look like a stab wound. So this is, sometimes it has been in contact with the body was lying up against a wall or something, and you can't really, how did this happen? Because there's like a boundary. And sometimes you will have other organs also affected and extruding from the body. But as I said, we want to try to match entry and exit wound and to see if we can find a trajectory and describe that. Next slide, please. Then everybody wants to know the range. Remember, we're trying to document in order to tell a story to the court or someone else who wasn't there. We are in the position of an expert trying to use the evidence after death to tell the story. So how much was this person shot? And sometimes that's all we get, you know, that it's so many injuries, but also the range. And that's determined, it's an estimate. Again, be careful, don't sort of say, oh, it was like in Hollywood, exactly 40 centimeters, it couldn't have been this person and things like that. But we have some signs. Because the bullet is hot and the gas and the flame, there is often a burn mark, as I said, around the skin. It's searing the skin and the hairs of the body. Next one. This soot, right? And that you can try to wipe it off just to know whether it is blood. Let me turn off my own video and then it's maybe better. There's blood and things around the wound and to see clearly, but just note very carefully, are you wiping away any soot? Next slide. Another thing we look for is stippling. This is where the hot gunpowder has made a tattoo. It can be red, orange, black, really hard to see on dark skin. So you really have to look, but that's going to help us as we come, that's another clue we want. There can be fragments of a bullet which looks like stippling. So you have to look hard and say, is this kind of tattooing or is that little bits of iron left in the skin? Next slide, please. Now, when we then put all this together, we're trying to determine the range. if you have an execution style injury where the gun is in contact with the body as it's being shot, that heat will really make a burn mark. So typical to the head, you will see the tattoo. You will see the skin being scorched. And that's hard contact, is like, it's really in touch and you don't get any of the stippling, but it's that darkened, burnt skin that's very important. So clean it up, take a good picture of that. It's burning from the powder and it's an imprint from the hot muscle of the gun. Next slide, please. Near contact is it's not actually touching the skin, right? But very short distance, around 1 centimeter. And there you have the burning still, and with the suit, but you don't have that very clear tattoo ring of the muscle. Next one. Intermediate range. So very hard to say what's intermediate. We're talking of few centimeters and to less than a meter, right? And this is often when someone is claiming that this person committed suicide, and no, it looks like somebody else did it. And here the hallmark is that stippling, that tattooing of the gunpowder. And you can see this picture, it's easy because it is a pale person's skin and it sticks out, but you really have to look for it on dark skin. Next slide, please. Distant range, that's what we're mostly seeing now, right? People being shot at from a distance more than a meter with much bigger and irregular things, but still, as I said earlier, look for that inverted edge and no stippling, because if it's stippling, then it's intermediate range. And that's how you will describe it. Either close contact, intermediate range, from a distance. Don't try to be Hollywood and say this was from 30 meters or 20 meters. You can't say. You can see on many of these pictures, there's a nice little ruler. My experience in Kenya, there are none of these things available in the mortuary. Make it for yourself with the Post-it note. Just make the markings so that you give a approximate size of how many centimeters it is. Next slide, please. Then comes the documentation. And so, you know, don't try to be, or don't be afraid that you don't have all the very sort of highfalutin language. Both Professor Rogena and Dr. Odwar keep reminding people you are writing it for lay people. So it's important to be clear and systematic so that they actually understand it. You want the location of the wounds, the size, as I said, the centimeters, and the character. Is it an entry wound? Is it an exit wound? And then if you can say the path of the wound, of the bullet through the body, if you have done an X-ray or something, what injured structures. Now, if you find hemothorax, if you find that the liver is injured, you may mention that. But back again to the wound track, just use your normal anatomic positions that it's described as shot from the front to the back, from the left to the right, slightly downward. You know, just be happy with those descriptions. You don't have to do in the axial plane, the plantar plane, all of those kind of things. We're not doing our anatomy exam. We're telling a story to the court. We're documenting it. Keep it straightforward English. Next slide, please. Any other evidence? So again, the bullet fragments, if you find that, be very careful as you take it out. Don't use forceps more than you have to. You know, better use your gloved finger, wipe off just gently any blood and put it, Dr. Rogena was saying, not in a paper bag, but in, you know, a specimen bottle and hand over to the police. This is not as easy as it's written. The chain of custody is usually where we fail when we come to court cases. Whatever the evidence you find is initially your responsibility. Then you have to hand it over to the investigating officer and sign for it. So that's afterwards, when you have been able to take off your gloves and wash your hands. There's a form, and sometimes they pretend they don't have the form. Create one with a piece of paper. I, Ling Kitui, ID number this and this, hand it over, 1, 2, 3, 2, and then name and the force number of the police officer, and take a photo, right? Take a photo of the evidence that is handed over. There is a form they are supposed to provide. Take a photo of the form as well, right? Because this is the evidence that disappears. And as I mentioned, there may be a discussion between DCI and IPOA if they are both in the room. It's actually not your problem. Yes, IPOA is to investigate the police. They don't have the forensic capability of DCI to check on ballistics. So they basically become like a monitor that things are done correctly. And they can do like you, take a photo, and we know exactly who took it. And then they will have to hand it over and in turn sign the form, who they handed over in the forensic laboratory. But many times I have seen cartridges and bullets just disappear into someone's pocket and being missed, and then you gets very hard to link the who shot the person, right? So don't be intimidated in this setting. Just say, hold on, I need to sign for this. Don't take it. And then do this. As I've already said, the overriding concern is that our report has to be as clear as observed by the doctor and understood by the reader, be it a family lawyer, a court, investigating officers. We are at the service of humanity. The former chief government pathologist, Dr. Lumbe, used to say, we use the dead to serve the living, right? To describe what actually we see had happened. Next slide, please. Now, a big challenge in these kind of extraordinary circumstances is the death certificate, the conclusion on the report. There are very many times in Kenya, people write cardiopulmonary arrest. Sure, we all die from that eventually, but what caused the cardiopulmonary arrest? Professor Rogena reminded us that the Kenya Medical and Dental Council, now, sorry, I'm old, Council has released an online training on how to fill in death certificates. But the important thing here is, please say that there was a gunshot wound. Don't just say like wound to the head. Fine, due to gunshot. This is really important because, as you can hear, it is already contested how many people died. and how they died. I have been concentrating very much on the deceased. For those of you who are doing surgery, of course, your overriding concern is saving lives. So you may not have that much time to look at, is this entry wound, is this exit wound? To the extent you can, do not cut through the wound and stitch it up, right? Make your incision slightly away, and then we can take photos of the wound even as you have finished the life-saving surgery. I repeat, to the extent possible. The most important is to save lives, of course. But as we have already seen, some of the people are so seriously injured that even after surgery, they pass away. And we really want to document this properly. Next slide, please. Yeah. So you've taken copy of your evidence of the body. You've taken copy of the chain of custody, and you're writing your report. You have to hand it over to the police. Keep a copy yourself. There is the police form, but we have from the Attorney General that it is fine. You know, some people just scribble handwritten. It is fine to write your own report. As the chief government pathologist says, it's not an emergency to a post-mortem. So you don't have to just scribble a few lines on the government form, and that's the end of it. You can go home, write a proper report in Word, and attach it to the form before you sign it with your photos, right? Where you have space to describe. It's just like the P3 form. Very little space to describe the injuries. The Attorney General has ruled that the doctor can, on the P3 form, or I forget the name of the other one, just write and say, see attached report. Boom, that's it. So keep it. You don't know who might be following up the case, but IMLU, we are always very keen on following up this, to have the right numbers. I'm so old, I was on night duty during Saba Saba in 1990. The number of deaths that still are in the public domain is far less than the number of bodies we counted as junior doctors who were night duty. And it's a bit of a repeat now, right? It's so unclear how many people have died, and it's all over the country this time. So we're trying to get the documentation, also to help the family to link the injuries with pictures, videos of who was shooting, so we can actually hold a perpetrator to account. Kenya Medical Association has its Human Rights Committee, also a place to take care of and to report what you have seen. My practice for many years was that before I gave it to anyone, I had sent, those days we had only email, but you've got now all things, WhatsApp, Signal, Telegraph, to somebody outside. Even, again, I'm so old, even before email, I used to make copies of all the reports and hand in a brown paper envelope to all the major embassies that were down in CBD. So if anything happened to my computer or to anything, it was already too late. The report had been shared in many copies. Now with electronic communication, it is easy to share, so that it isn't like you are the only repository of the information. You've shared it out, and it's too late for anyone to do anything to you. I think that was my last slide. I'll put on the video again. There.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, for taking us through this and the great work yourself and your team are doing in IMLU. We appreciate that. I see Prof. Rogena has joined. Karibu sana. So I think we can address the questions that are up on our Q&A box. Lucy is asking, is it mandatory for the family to be present during the postmortem, or one can do without the family present?
So the answer is, as I said in my talk, try not to have them in the room as you are working, but someone has to identify the body, right? So that is usually a family member who comes in and says, yes, this is Linkitui, and then they're escorted out. Professor, do you want to add to that?
Thank you so much, Lynn, for that presentation, very clear. I want to say regarding a representation of the family in the room, the family usually is very emotional and they really want to demand there, but it is a no. Just allow them to identify and then they get out, and if they want representation, you can stop the procedure and ask them to bring a doctor to represent them. This was envisaged even the Coroner Service Act that is being implemented now. They're trying to implement it now. They wrote that Coroner Service Act says that the family should, if they want to be represented, if in this case they agree with IMLU or they agree with any other organization that then appoints a doctor for them, then they will not need to be there. Because most of the time, the reason is not, the main reason is that most times there is a misinterpretation because they are not professionals. They don't know what the body looks like, what the inside and the outside and the things look like. So they give the wrong interpretation. And more so if you allow people like nurses, clinical officers who are not trained in this, then they come out to give a report as it is. And they're giving out the wrong report. And you start to bring push and pull between police and the public on things that are really not factual, or with family and any other person, things that are not factual. Thank
you. Thank you very much, Prof. So Simon is asking, kindly comment on the use of video evidence. It doesn't seem to have been used as widely as expected in medical legal cases.
Yeah, I mentioned about photo because it was or often is still argued that no, it's only the official police photographer who can take photos. Videos would be the same. But Professor Rogena, I cited what you said on Friday, that there is a court ruling that the doctors own photos and video. But, you know, it's always, you've got to be very careful that nothing has been changed, that edited or different kind of filters put on it. Often a photo is clear enough. So are you talking about the evidence of the injuries or video evidence of the events on the street? I'm not quite sure, because that might be two different scenarios. Professor Rogena, I know this has been a lot of discussion with the Evidence Act.
I think this is where that's a very nice question. And as we develop and continue to progress in terms of evidence, I challenge the lawyers to see that the Evidence Act is improved. And I think Dr. Duor is in this group. He is now a lawyer. They really need to change a lot on the Evidence Act to sit in the current situation where we are now. We are digital, we are real time, things that were not there many years ago. So the evidence, the act, there's an act that says that a photographer must be appointed by the Attorney General for them to present that evidence. But the court allows doctors to actually put in their evidence, photographic evidence, as part of the evidence. And indeed, that's why we are telling us as a group, as a team, to ensure that you label them properly. You make sure the identity is on the photo, the rule, remember the ruler you were being told about, so that the ruler is actually matching the size you're saying, so that it can corroborate your story and it can take the story to court. I gave last week a story of a piece of evidence that we were trying to give in court in the early 2000s. A young man had been beaten, and now part of what we had in court was our pictures, photographs that we had taken with still photos and printed, and they were very nicely labeled and matched with the body. Now, the defense refused to accept the photo using photographs using that clause. But of course, the judge demanded that we put a hearing within a hearing. And she now had a hearing regarding what the Evidence Act says, what the law says, what is happening elsewhere. And she made a ruling that actually, I remember the statement, maybe I have not quoted it as exact, Justice Wanjiru in Kitale, she said, how can a doctor bring the mortuary room to the court without pictures? This is the only way doctors are able to tell their story on what they did and what they saw. Thank you. So they're important, but I think the law needs to change so that we can be able to give good evidence.
I've been scrolling through the attendance list and I can't see Dr. Odwor. So please, if you are there, identify yourself. It would be very nice to hear for your experience.
Thank you, Dr. Lin. I've noted in the chat box, Dr. Walong has recommended or advised that for photo, invest in a DSLR or mirrorless camera with at least a 50mm lens, a lighting source, and a ruler. So thank you, Dr. Walong, for that. So Dr. Stella is asking about the stippling around the gunshot wound. Does it show if the person was clothed at the point of the entry wound? Dr. Kitui?
Does it show if the person is close? That was the point, that it is a way of trying to estimate the range. You will only find stippling if it is what we call intermediate range, around 1 centimeter to 1 meter, right? So that's a huge range as it is. But if you find stippling, somebody was close or intermediate range. It was not a gunshot from a far distance. And it was not close contact with that tattoo of the muscle, as I explained. So stippling is to help you make an estimate about the range, whether close contact, intermediate, or distant. We're not able to say much more.
What I can add, thank you, Ling. That is why also we need a very good and sincere ballistics department in the DCI, because clothing is part of what must be examined, and the clothing will, we've done postmortems where a pocket has actually a piece of fragment. So the clothing needs to be examined on site, but also needs to be submitted to be examined for the gunshot residues that may burn or may pepper into the clothing. And of course, we need to then bag them separately and give them so that they can also examine and show, because those are metallic fragments. There are ways by which they are able to show those fragments and how they have patterned or around the wound. And so when you are examining the wound on the body, the wound on the clothing is also very important. You examine it at the same time and show what you're seeing, admit, albeit with your naked eye, how it is peppering around on entry on the clothes. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Stella, I think your question has been adequately or sufficiently answered. So Anthony is asking, is it mandatory to take an X-ray, especially if no exit wound is visible? If so, what do you do in rural areas where X-rays may not be available?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. As I started my talk, this is like a crash course for field workers. This is not the ideal situation. Nothing is mandatory like an X-ray. It's helpful, right? But if you don't have it, you don't have it. And if there are issues to block you from getting an X-ray, but it can be helpful if the bullet has touched a bone to help with the trajectory. And it's also helpful for you to find that bullet if there is no exit wound. So it is very much, as I put on one of the first slides, the standard thing to do in ideal circumstances. But I know many of us are working in less than ideal circumstances. Professor?
That's a very important question that has been asked. How ideal, how available, how is whether X-ray is available or not? Even in the rural settings, we have situations where you can actually organize to have the body wheeled to do a mobile radio X-ray, or just use the hard fixed X-ray machines to take your photographs. Remember, we said these bodies are helping the living. You're not just going to look at it that it is a police investigation, it's a dead body. You try your best to facilitate to have the X-ray done. In the rural areas, if the X-ray facility is available, then you can organize to have the X-ray done at night when live patients are not going into the X-ray room, and then let it go out. Why I'm saying this is sometimes when you try to do PMs without an X-ray machine, and especially with small ammunitions, you can spend even 24 hours looking for that bullet because of ricochet. You know, it hits a place in the body and then takes another direction, which you cannot see with your naked eye. It's only the X-ray that can be able to determine. There are days we used to do PMs at City Mortuary without X-rays, and we would do PMs for like 2 days, trying to track the bullet. And yet the City Mortuary had an X-ray machine that was broken down. They had bought that machine specifically for X-ray. So what we then developed was to try and see if the family could afford. We used to have the body taken to KMA for X-rays. Yes and no. It needs to be done. We ought to treat the post-mortem cases just as important as the live cases. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I see Crystal has posted a question on the chat. A kind reminder to post your questions on the Q&A. But Crystal is asking, is there a mandated time frame, either by law or hospital regulations, for submitting the bullet recovered during surgery to the authorities? For instance, how many hours after a gunshot victim arrives at the hospital or medical professionals typically required to submit the bullet for forensic analysis? Prof, will you take that?
As far as I know, and I'll ask those who are lawyers, I know there are many doctors here who have done law. As far as I know, there is no limited time or no time limit for producing the evidence to the investigating officers. The only thing that we have to remember is that while you have the evidence, you have the custody. You have to maintain that custody of that evidence and ensure that the chain of custody is maintained. And so, if possible, you have to put it under lock and key within your own administrative. You do not take it home settings, so that when whoever is going to pick it from you shall pick it from you, so that the chain of custody of that evidence is maintained. But there's no time limit.
Thank you. Prof.
I think this is not biological material that deteriorates over time. This is material that can be changed depending on how it is handled. So as I said, don't use forceps, don't touch with your own fingers, wrap it in gauze. But I would be, because I'm just trying to think the situation that maybe the questioner was saying. If you are with a dead body in a mortuary, it follows as you sign over the chain of custody to the investigating officer. But if you are maybe in an accident emergency room and you're helping a live patient and there's a bullet you retrieve, I would also be very, very careful on making sure the chain of custody is very carefully described. So I'm just trying to think back to my own days as a casualty officer. Whenever we had very important things, we would put it in the DDA cupboard, so the doctor would sign for it and the nurse in charge would sign for it, and then the investigating police come maybe the next morning and sign that they have received it. So don't let it just go into somebody's pocket. I think that's, so again, as I said, this is a field experience. We heard quite harrowing stories on Friday from people who were down by Holy Family Basilica, where bodies and notes were whisked away. Yeah, when there's a crisis, things don't happen the correct way. There's someone, Dr. Brenda, there's someone with the hand up. I don't know if you see that.
Peter, if you can kindly.
I think it's Isabella.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Isabella. I work with the Independent Medical Legal Unit. I think it's important we buttress the fact that video evidence, and sorry to take you back, is what you would also call a document, depending on how you handle it. So if you're a doctor, just as said, please do not worry about taking photos or videos. The only condition is please do not edit. Don't put a filter. I know we love filters. Don't crop, don't shorten. Just make sure that you take something that will be used just as you have taken it. I think that's I know our Evidence Act is a little dusty, but it sure does allow for that. Now, there are certain conditions as to how you store it. So that's where we can work on that act. But as is right now, do not worry about taking photos simply and videos, but just do not edit. Thank you. And then on the other bit for timeframes, I'm hearing the discussion. Daktari, if you have anything that you get into contact with, say a bullet, there's no specific time frame, but as soon as you recover it. What do I mean when I say recover? We had a case 2 years back where a person had a bullet lodged somewhere in the body. I don't know what they call that, but he had had it for over 4 months. So if you were to go to court, no one would question you as to why that stayed that long. It's a biological process. So there is no time frame, but as soon as you have been able to retrieve it. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. If we knew you were here earlier, we would have thrown all the legal questions to you. But
I'm here, Dr.
So, Dr. Walong says, please reiterate the importance of skin marking diagrams, which are particularly helpful in contextualizing injuries. And Charles, I see you're asking about comments on other types of injuries, that is flashbangs, tear gas, rubber bullets. Are there any special patterns of injury? So this, Charles, may be covered in a subsequent webinar. We'll be having a series particularly on this subject. So stay tuned for that. However, I'll allow Dr. Lin and Prof to maybe address any of those two questions.
So Professor has her hand up. Let her go first.
Sorry, I'm not going to answer the question. I didn't get it very well, but I think Dr. has allowed us to tackle it at another time. I just wanted to continue on the issue of photography. Please ensure that you label them, ensure that they are yours, that they belong to that body, so that the evidence can be able to hold. I remember when we were younger, the police would intimidate us a lot and say that, oh, you're not supposed to take a photograph, okay? They would even demand that our cameras are not brought into the post-mortem room. And we resisted that, we rejected that, and hence we were able to take photographs. Now, I will also add that you don't have to use professional cameras if you don't have, okay? Our digital phones are doing very well. I think Odwar will tell you that he only takes photos with his digital camera, which he has on his phone, because that is what is available to you and it can do very, very well. So ensure that your digital camera has very good pixels, clear, and take with the photography requirements. There are actually webinars and also Zoom and Google topics on forensic photography. Just read and enlighten yourself, because that's a whole area in itself, photography in the area of forensic. And it works both for the surgeon and also for the pathologist, because the surgeon also, even as he is taking, managing the patient, he is also picking some evidence. He will come to court at some point, whether the patient made it or not. Thank you.
And just to reiterate, the question was about flash guns and rubber bullets. And I think our job, particularly as, shall we say, ordinary medical officers, not pathologists, is to document. We may not actually know the kind of ammunition or the cause of the injury, right? So what kind of ammunition is used? We have on Friday, doctors were reporting that they had seen rubber bullets penetrate the skin. They were designed not to do that, but if you are close enough, anything can penetrate the skin, right? So you can beat somebody with a stick and the skin breaks. So it is about documenting the injury, and with a flash gun, there would probably be a lot more burning and searing, as I said. And I would be cautious then on making the conclusion if it was not very clear that it's a gunshot. You could say with a projectile, right? That where I said, the person died due to, this and this and gunshot. Then I would have said some kind of projectile. So I would be, but this is why it's important to have help. You don't have to write your report inside the mortuary. You can sit down, you can think, you can ask for expert advice from someone who has seen this before. So yes, there are new tools that the law enforcement has that we are not that familiar with, and we'll have to educate ourselves, and KMA has actually agreed that we will have a series of talks also on other injuries. I see Professor put your hand up again. Maybe now that you heard the question again.
No, I agree with what you have said. As you speak, one also thinks about the important things in this topic. And you, Ling, clearly stated on what the cause of death is. Our conclusion on the cause of death. The conclusion on the cause of death is very important. It will be gunshot to whichever organ, how many gunshots, if there are many. But remember, you may also be asked to state, which you ought to state, what other illness did this person have? And we cannot hide what other illness that existed that comes in your main report within the document of the report, or even in the D1 part as a part 2. If the person had bronchopneumonia, if the person had a brain abscess, I wanted to give the example of a man, a 46-year-old man who died somewhere on Langata Road. I always give this example because of culpability. You want to show the culpability of the bullet vis-a-vis what else existed. This man was shot in the head. He went to one of the big hospitals. He was treated. The bullet was removed on his temporal area. And then he developed a brain abscess. And in the brain abscess, after developing this brain abscess, 4 months later, he died. When we were doing the post-mortem, we found a brain abscess, but we also found a cavitation in the lung. There was tuberculous cavitation in his lung. The police pathologist decided to take the TB as the cause of death. And it was a big argument. I remember then the Attorney General, former Attorney General, Gideon Muigai was the defense lawyer. They wanted to hang on the TB cavitation as the cause of death. So we must be very careful what we hang as the cause of death, because you find your victim the way they were. The guy was driving. He was not complaining about his TB, one. Number two, many of us are actually walking around with cavitations that are silent, that are not about to kill us. And so the cavitation was there, yes, but it is at Roman 2 in the D1. Any other condition that we find that may or may not have contributed to the death. And even in terms of the brain abscess, yes, the brain abscess was immediate, but what was underlying? Gunshot wound to the head. So we must give the culpability that that wound has, so that we don't downgrade it, because we've seen more horrifying complications. A complication just comes about as a result of what brought in the complication. So the underlying must be stated correctly. Thank you.
Dr. Brenda, do you see?
Yes, thank you. Yes, we see Isabella's hand up. You can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Daktari. I just want to say something on use of force. Now, gone are the days where all deaths we documented or injuries were simply from live bullets. Now, I'm saying this because we need to get into that discussion maybe in the series to discuss the use of less lethal weapons and the lethal weapons. The global discussion is that there's nothing as less lethal force. You know, force is force. But I think at the documentation level, doctors do a good job for us when we get to court in terms of telling us what was used. So I know we had questions last week on what does a rubber bullet look like? What does it do? I think as we move along, that would be a good discussion. We do have soft laws that guide the documentation of the use of weapons. So that is something I think I can work on with Dr. Ling, because we have seen the intentional misuse of less lethal weapons by officers to maim and to kill. But I can't argue for that if the documentation or the medical records don't talk about that. So if they were hit by a tear gas canister and they developed complications and they died maybe 6 months later, I need to have some form of documentation to walk us through that particular period. So I think, Dr. Ling, as we move along, we could then get into the various range of less lethal weapons, because there are very many. You have batons, you have rubber bullets. If it is the the lethal weapons, we have a different range. So maybe we could look at the range that we currently have in Kenya, how we use it, especially in the context of assemblies, and how we document them accordingly. Our laws don't, speak about them as we should, but we have soft laws that can guide courts in terms of making a determination when we have that kind of documentation. Thank you, Dr. Brenda.
Thank you, Isabella. I think Dr. Simon has a question on safety. I think Dr. Lin had given a few options on how we can secure, but he says that how can we ensure the safety of the evidence we hand over to the police, especially when it is the police being accused? So Isabella, I don't know if you'd also chime in there, and I'll allow Prof and Dr. Kitui as well.
Okay. Yeah, that has been a challenge. That has been a challenge. We do understand, again, it's been mentioned, chain of custody. We know for a fact that while documenting, then you'll give it to the DCI, not IPOA. But as civil society, we have always said that you give it to IPOA, knowing full and well that there's very little they can do with it. We are currently talking about having a different unit handle cases against police officers, because when you hand anything over, there's always what we call the blue code of silence. You have handed over a useful piece of evidence, especially in forensic cases, and everything stalls for various reasons, because some choose to protect their own. So there, some tact would work, so that, for instance, you work with people that you have already trained, people who have, a human rights eye to what they look for, what they document, but there's no guarantee that your case will be successful. However, the best bet is you document accurately who you are, what you have handed over, who you've handed over to, what time, and the condition. That's our best bet for now. Thank you.
I think, Dr. Brenda, I think we have someone from IPOA online. I saw in the chat saying, send this to IPOA, the presentation to IPOA address. Maybe that person wants to add.
Yes. If you can kindly raise your hand, then we can unmute. IPOA. Okay.
Okay, but but it was raised, as Dr. Kikondo knows, also on Friday, and I think it's one of IMLU's to-do lists to actually convene some kind of discussion with IPOA and DCI on, firstly, to have a sort of clear guideline. Who does the doctor hand over the evidence to if both of them are in the... Oh, here it says Christine Owino from IPOA is online. Christine, do you want to add to the question about the concern that evidence gets tampered with when we hand it over to the police? And maybe explain to many people online, what does IPOA do?
I think, Peter, if you're able to unmute her or enable her to speak kindly. Peter, are you able to?
Come again, Doc.
Christine Owino, can you upgrade her to panelist or enable her to speak? I might switch on her mic.
Christine, kindly raise your hand.
So I don't think she's on the line. I tried to look for her. So
okay, fine. So
I'll give her
that
a
can
call,
be,
and then when she's ready, she'll join us. I'll give her a call shortly.
you know her. Okay, I just saw in the chat as I was following the chat.
Isabella, yes.
No, I'm saying I'll give Council Christine a call. When she's ready, I'll alert you to allow her to speak.
We are almost through, but it's okay.
Yeah.
So I see Prof has given a really good way forward. She says if KMA and IMLU can work together with the doctors network to identify and count all the injuries alive or dead as a call to justice. Prof, that's noted. And that is
maybe
what we should
Brenda,
do. Yeah, President.
Maybe Brenda, I can make a comment on that. I think the police working group, PWG, and the Kenya Medical Association, the Law Society of Kenya, and other human rights body have a situation room domiciled at the Kenya National Human Rights Commission, what we call situation room. And that is a place where information comes in. It's where information is collated, and it's the place we quote numbers from. But the reason for that is safety, so that you notice that government will say, oh, we had only 18 deaths, but the information center says there were 28. This is important to have collated information so that you are not asked to produce the other bodies over and above what government has said. So government will always understate, but it is also important to also have your own internal numbers so that you may not project them outward, but you could have those numbers as evidence. Like, for instance, the numbers of injured in hospitals. For instance, the Kenya Medical Association executive visited Kenyatta Hospital, and you sort of get accurate information on who was admitted, who was treated. And when you have this information, I think it's also useful, especially in the early days. But yes, it's important to have these numbers.
Okay, so I think with that we can close so that we are on time and we can all go into the activities of the day. I'd like to thank IMLU, Dr. Lynn and Prof. Rogena for being available for this knowledge sharing and extending that to the younger doctors and those who have been documenting or meeting these cases. This is really valuable and we appreciate it. I'd like to also appreciate the KMA for noting the need for this as well and quickly coming together with our long-term partners IMLU. I'd like to thank all of you for availing yourselves to learn. This webinar is CPD accredited, so through the registration details you shared, we'll be able to share with you CPD tokens as per your council. And we'd like to also urge you to look out for the series coming up. This is the second webinar in the series. So we are going to continue to have these webinars with IMLU. We've had various suggestions from the last webinar and this one as well on the knowledge gaps that we need to be addressed. So we look forward to having you next time. Thank you. The recording will be available on both IMLU and KMA YouTube channel. So please look out for that as well. Asanteni sana.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.